In 2002, a woman vanished just hours after waking to find her couch ripped apart and her 5 shepherd dogs terrified, growling at something she couldn't see. Minutes later, she stepped outside alone for the first time, and never returned. What the dogs tried to warn her about would shake an entire town. In the quiet outskirts of Brookfield, Oregon, people believed nothing truly terrible could happen. Small-town life moved slowly, predictably, comfortingly. And for 32-year-old Clara Maynard, life was no different. Routine morning runs, predictable work shifts, and afternoons spent playing with her 5 German shepherds, her only companions after a painful divorce 2 years earlier. Her neighbors often joked that Clara was never really alone, because those shepherds followed her everywhere, room to room inside the house and step for step outside. They were fiercely protective, loyal, and oddly intuitive. Anyone who came near the property knew better than to cross the invisible line the dogs guarded. But on the morning of October 14, 2002, everything changed. That day, for the first time ever, Clara left her home alone. No dogs, no leash, nothing. She stepped out, locked the door, and vanished before noon. The mystery stunned the entire town. Why would a woman who never left home without her dogs suddenly walk out unprotected? What happened inside that house before she left? And who took advantage of the one day she had no protection? 10 months later, investigators uncovered the horrifying truth, one that involved a destroyed couch, a silent struggle, and a predator who had been watching Clara for months. Clara woke just after dawn to a strange, musty smell. She blinked a few times, letting her eyes adjust. The house was silent, too silent. Usually, the shepherds were already circling her bed, nudging her awake or whining for attention. But not today. Then she heard it, a soft, rhythmic thumping coming from the living room. "Bane! Luna!" she called out, slipping into her slippers. The moment she turned the corner into the living room, her heart dropped. The couch, her grandmother's old olive-green sofa, was torn apart. Stuffing littered the floor like freshly fallen snow. The wooden frame was chewed, deep scratch marks slashed across the cushions, and the fabric hung in ribbons. Her 5 shepherds sat in the middle of the destruction, ears pinned back, eyes alert, not guilty, not mischievous, but afraid. "What happened to you guys?" Clara murmured. But as she took a closer look, she realized something chilling. The dogs weren't staring at her. They were staring past her, toward the front door. All tails were stiff. All bodies were braced. These were not dogs who misbehaved. These were dogs responding to a threat. Clara checked the locks. Everything seemed normal. The windows were closed. Nothing looked forced. Still, something didn't feel right. Across the room, she noticed her phone on the floor, as if it had been knocked off the table. And her keys were missing from their hook by the door. She sighed, thinking maybe the dogs had panicked at a loud noise and caused the chaos. It sounded like a stretch, but she didn't have a better explanation. Frustrated, overwhelmed, and already late for her morning shift at the craft store, Clara grabbed her spare keys from the drawer. She opened the door, stepped out, and, against her better judgment, closed it behind her. Behind her, inside the house, 5 shepherds erupted into frantic barking. It was the last time anyone saw Clara alive. By late afternoon, Clara's sister Michelle grew worried. Clara was always home by 3 p.m. to feed the dogs. When multiple calls went unanswered, Michelle drove straight to Clara's home. She found the house trembling with barks, panicked, relentless, desperate. Michelle unlocked the door and gasped. The living room was still a war zone of shredded fabric and stuffing. The dogs paced in circles, agitated, anxious, whining every few seconds as if trying to communicate something urgent. "Clara!" Michelle called out. Silence. She checked every room, the bedroom, the bathroom, the backyard, but Clara was nowhere. The shepherds followed her closely, nudging her hands, pulling toward the front door repeatedly. Michelle dialed 911. Within the hour, deputies arrived. Neighbors watched from porches, whispering, worried. It didn't take long for the officers to realize this wasn't a simple case of a woman skipping work or running errands. Her purse was inside. Her wallet was in the bedroom. Her dogs were unfed. Her work uniform hung neatly on the closet door. And her main house key, the one that normally hung on the hook, was missing. Something bad had happened. One officer bent down to examine the destroyed couch. "These marks, these aren't normal," he muttered. "Dogs don't destroy furniture this aggressively unless they're reacting to something. Fear, a threat, an intruder." Michelle's stomach twisted. "You're saying someone broke in?" The officer didn't answer. Instead, he knelt and looked one of the shepherds in the eyes. The dog growled softly, not at him, but toward the front door, toward the outside. Within minutes, search teams formed. Volunteers combed the surrounding woods. A helicopter scanned the area. By dusk, the entire town was involved. But there was no sign of Clara. Just 5 dogs who seemed to know more than anyone realized. Detectives began retracing Clara's last known movements. They spoke to co-workers who confirmed she never arrived at her shift. They reviewed her call logs, bank records, and recent purchases, nothing unusual. But one detail stood out. For the past month, Clara had called the local non-emergency line 3 separate times to report a strange white van parked near her property at night. She said she felt watched, but the van always disappeared before police arrived. Every report was logged, but never followed up. Now investigators regretted that oversight. Several neighbors admitted they'd seen the van too. "It always drove off when someone came outside," one man said. "The engine was too quiet," another added. "Like it was waiting," whispered a third. Inside Clara's home, detectives searched the damaged couch again. Underneath a ripped cushion, they discovered something they had missed earlier. A small smear of blood. Too little to be from a major injury. Too much to ignore. It was sent to the lab. Meanwhile, the shepherds still refused to calm down. They growled at the windows at night, paced restlessly, and startled at every sound. These were well-trained dogs, yet now they acted like animals who had sensed a predator. 2 days later, lab results came back. The blood on the couch was human. And it wasn't Clara's. Investigators widened the search radius and brought in professional tracking dogs. Surprisingly, Clara's own shepherds were kept in the house. They were too agitated to participate effectively. But on the 3rd day, something unexpected happened. One of the shepherds, the oldest male named Bane, squeezed through the backyard fence and bolted toward the woods behind the property, barking with a terrifying combination of rage and desperation. The other 4 followed, howling. Michelle screamed for help as officers sprinted after them. The dogs ran in a straight line for nearly a mile, through the woods, over a creek, across an abandoned field. Then suddenly they stopped. They circled one specific area, paws hitting the ground repeatedly, barking toward a patch of disturbed soil. The officers recognized the meaning immediately. Something, or someone, had been buried there recently. Detectives dug into the loose soil while deputies secured the perimeter. Bane paced anxiously, whining each time an officer shoveled a deeper layer of dirt. The other shepherds snarled softly, hackles raised as if expecting someone to jump out of the shadows. After 15 minutes of digging, officers uncovered a tarp. Inside it were broken zip ties, a strip of duct tape, and a torn piece of fabric, identical to the shirt Clara had worn the day before. But there was something else buried nearby, fresh tire tracks pressed into the mud. Investigators photographed them, noting the distinct pattern. They matched the description of the white van Clara had reported. The sheriff exhaled slowly. This wasn't a random disappearance. She was abducted. Michelle collapsed to her knees. "Where is she now?" No one answered. That night, the sheriff's office held an emergency briefing. FBI agents joined the investigation. Roadblocks were set up. Every white van in the county was inspected. Patrol units searched abandoned warehouses, storage units, and remote cabins. And still, nothing. The entire town was shaken. The idea that someone had been stalking Clara for weeks, or months, terrified everyone. But the break they needed came 4 days later. A local mechanic called the sheriff's office after seeing the news coverage. He remembered working on a white van belonging to a man named Evan Rourke, a reclusive handyman with a criminal past and unpredictable temper. He lived in a cabin deep in the woods, off-grid, isolated, unreachable by normal patrol routes. Officers and FBI teams headed there immediately. The shepherds, still restless and agitated, were placed in kennels for their own safety. They wouldn't stay there long. Rourke's cabin sat behind a dense wall of fir trees, nearly invisible from the dirt trail leading to it. Officers split into teams, surrounding the perimeter quietly. No lights were on inside. No sound came from within. When agents forced the door open, the odor hit instantly, metallic, stale, unmistakable. Blood. Inside, the cabin was cluttered with tools, scrap metal, and piles of garbage. But one room was different, a narrow corridor leading to a basement door secured with an industrial padlock. Agents broke it open. The basement was cold, windowless, and underground. And in the middle of the room was an iron chair bolted to the floor, restraints still attached. Beside it lay a torn piece of fabric matching Clara's jacket. And on the far wall, fresh blood spatter. But Clara herself wasn't there. A second door led deeper underground to a storm cellar. Inside, investigators found a chilling clue, a shoe print in the mud, Clara's size, and a set of drag marks leading out the back toward an unmarked trail. But the trail was days old and nearly impossible to follow. Almost impossible. That night, as agents prepared to continue the search at dawn, the sheriff received an urgent call from the kennel where Clara's dogs were kept. The shepherds were going wild again. They refused food, paced non-stop, and howled toward the forest. Bain had already chewed halfway through the steel latch of his kennel. Michelle begged authorities to let the dogs join the search. The sheriff hesitated. Then he looked at the evidence. The torn couch, the buried tarp, the precision with which the dogs had found the first burial site. "These dogs know something," he finally said. "Let them lead us." And so, the very next morning, the shepherds were released. They didn't run toward Clara's house. They didn't run toward the old burial site. They sprinted straight into the forest, toward the cabin, and past it. Officers struggled to keep up as the shepherds tore through the woods. Their barks echoed against the trees, sharp and frantic. They weren't tracking randomly. They were locked onto a scent trail, one familiar only to them. Bain led the pack, nose pressed to the ground, tail straight, body tense. 2 miles from the cabin, the dogs turned sharply downhill into a wet ravine. Mud splashed beneath their paws as they climbed toward a rocky embankment. Suddenly, Luna, the smallest of the 5, began digging ferociously. The others joined her. Deputies shouted for shovels, but by the time tools arrived, the dogs had already uncovered something. A pale human hand. Michelle screamed. Officers restrained her gently as forensic teams took over. Carefully, methodically, they removed layers of soil. Then they found her. Clara lay curled on her side, wrapped in a torn blanket, her hair matted and her clothes stained. A deep bruise marked her temple. Her wrists were raw from restraints. She had been killed within hours of her abduction. Michelle collapsed into an officer's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. But the dogs didn't cry. They didn't whine. They stood rigid, staring at the trees around them, growling low, as if expecting someone to return. And someone did. A twig snapped. Officers spun around. A figure burst out of the bushes, Evan Rourke, wild-eyed, filthy, and clutching a hunting knife. He lunged toward the sheriff. Before deputies could react, all 5 shepherds attacked. They charged with the fury of animals who had lost their person, their leader, their world. Rourke fell backward, screaming as the dogs pinned him down. Deputies managed to pull the dogs away before they killed him. Rourke was handcuffed, bleeding heavily, screaming incoherent threats as he was dragged away. When Michelle approached Clara's body, all 5 shepherds circled her, tails lowered, bodies trembling. They had led the investigation from the first moment their owner vanished. The couch destruction, the agitated behavior, the frantic escape from the backyard. They had tried to warn everyone. And in the end, they did what no search team, drone, or FBI unit could do. They found their owner. News of the discovery spread throughout Oregon within hours. The town of Brookfield held candlelight vigils, mourning a woman whose quiet life ended in a nightmare no one imagined. Evan Rourke was charged with kidnapping, murder, unlawful imprisonment, and multiple prior stalking offenses. His trial revealed the full truth. He had watched Clara for months. He mapped her schedule. He knew she lived alone. He knew the dogs were her only protection. And on October 14th, he broke into her home before dawn, hoping to catch her off guard. But he hadn't expected 5 trained shepherds to fight him. He stabbed one, injuring it, but the others attacked, forcing him to flee. That was when the couch was destroyed. The dogs were defending Clara after she fainted during the struggle. When she woke up confused, she didn't realize what had happened. She didn't realize the danger she was in. She didn't realize she had left the house on the only morning she was being hunted. After the trial, Michelle adopted all 5 shepherds. She kept them together, refusing every offer to separate them. "They're family," she told reporters. They saved her story. 4 years afterward, people visiting Michelle's home noticed something unusual. Every morning, just after sunrise, the shepherds walked to the front door and sat down in a row, quiet, still, waiting. As if expecting Clara to walk back in. As if refusing to forget. Clara's case became one of Oregon's most heartbreaking reminders of how quickly a life can be taken, and how powerful the instincts of loyal animals can be. Her 5 shepherds weren't just pets. They were guardians, witnesses, and ultimately the ones who led investigators to the truth. The couch they tore apart wasn't an act of misbehavior. It was a desperate warning, a last stand against the man who had slipped into their home. Her story also sparked new laws requiring follow-up investigations on repeated stalking reports, especially those involving suspected surveillance vehicles like the white van Clara had mentioned. But beyond the legal changes, what people remember most is the loyalty of 5 dogs who refused to stop searching for the woman who raised them, loved them, and trusted them. In a world full of uncertainty, their devotion stood as a powerful message. Sometimes justice doesn't begin with police. Sometimes it begins with instinct. Sometimes it begins with 5 shepherds who never gave up.